Eliza had always been drawn to things with history. Ancient places, antique artifacts, dusty books, she found them comforting, even in their decrepit state, as if they held the answers to life's mysteries. But the house she inherited from her great-grandmother was different. Located in a remote English village she had never heard of, this house was steeped in an unsettling past. The villagers referred to it only as the Whispering House, though none would elaborate when she asked why. Even the lawyer who handled the inheritance had spoken to her in cautious tones, mumbling something about odd occurrences and rumors, as if hesitant to divulge too much. When she first arrived, Eliza felt the overwhelming stillness surrounding the place, a stillness that felt unnatural, like a held breath. The exterior was draped in darkness even in the midday sun. Vines twisted up its stone walls, curling like skeletal fingers around the shuttered windows. She stared at the house, standing alone at the edge of a dense forest, and an inexplicable sensation crept up her spine, the sensation of being watched. The house seemed to loom over her as she unlocked the front door, its dark wooden frame groaning in response. The air inside was thick with the smell of damp wood, dust, and something faintly metallic, like iron. Dust particles floated through beams of weak sunlight that managed to squeeze through the stained glass above the entryway. The floors creaked beneath her feet, the boards warped and aged, whispering their displeasure at her intrusion. Her first few days in the house were filled with an uneasy quiet. At night, she would lie in bed and hear the soft creaks and groans of the old structure settling, but she quickly realized these sounds weren't typical. There was a pattern to them, as if someone, or something, was moving through the halls, pausing outside her door, waiting. The villagers in town were friendly but tight-lipped about the house. They stared at her with a mix of pity and fear, warning her subtly, in their hesitant, evasive ways, to be careful. An elderly woman in the village, Mrs. Thatcher, finally offered some details. Her face was etched with wrinkles that deepened when she spoke about the house. It was once a grand estate, Mrs. Thatcher said, her voice low and filled with something that sounded like regret. But over the years, strange things happened. People who went there didn't come back the same, if they came back at all. Eliza tried to ask more, but Mrs. Thatcher shook her head, her eyes flicking to the side as if she feared being overheard. The house, it remembers, was all she would say before turning and shuffling away, her cane tapping against the cobblestones as she went. On her fourth night, Eliza finally understood what Mrs. Thatcher meant. She had been lying in bed, staring up at the ceiling, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling that something was standing in the corner of her room, just out of sight. As she was drifting off, a faint whisper broke the silence, the sound coming from the walls themselves, seeping through the old plaster and wood. Her name. Eliza. Her heart raced as she sat up, glancing around the dim room. She flicked on her bedside lamp, casting long shadows that danced across the peeling wallpaper. The room was empty. She wanted to dismiss it as her imagination, but the sound of her name, spoken in a rasping, breathy voice, had been unmistakable. The whispers continued in the following nights, each time growing louder, more insistent. Sometimes they sounded like her own voice, sometimes like the voice of a child, or an old man, or a woman sobbing. She began to dread the darkness, yet felt compelled to stay, determined to understand the mystery of the house. She couldn't shake the feeling that it was calling to her, reaching into her mind, planting seeds of fear and despair. One evening, driven by a need to find answers, Eliza ventured into the library, a vast room lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves crammed with old books, many of them leather-bound and ancient. She traced her fingers over the spines, noting titles in Latin, Old English, and even symbols from languages she didn't recognize. Near the back of the room, she found a section of books that seemed different from the others. They were covered in dust, yet untouched, as if they hadn't been opened in centuries. One book in particular caught her eye, bound in cracked leather and inscribed with strange markings that seemed to shift when she looked directly at them. As she opened it, a chill ran down her spine. The pages were filled with illustrations of twisted, grotesque figures, their faces contorted in agony and terror. Some of them appeared to be clawing at their own faces, others were hunched over, emaciated, their eyes wide and staring. Below each figure was a single word, written in spidery, cramped handwriting, maledictus. Eliza shut the book, her hands trembling. The word echoed in her mind, filling her with a sense of impending doom. She placed the book back on the shelf, but as she turned to leave, a flicker of movement caught her eye. In the mirror on the opposite wall, she saw a shadow, vague and shapeless, but unmistakably there, lurking just behind her. When she turned around, there was nothing. From that night on, the house seemed to close in around her. Shadows appeared in places they shouldn't, stretching across walls, creeping up from the floor as if trying to reach her. She heard footsteps echoing through the empty halls, slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth outside her door. She felt eyes on her, watching her every move, and sometimes she would catch a flash of movement in her peripheral vision, a dark shape slinking away the moment she turned her head. The whispers grew louder, and now they weren't just calling her name, they were speaking to her, taunting her, reminding her of fears she had long buried. She tried to drown them out, playing music, reading aloud, anything to silence the voices, but they only grew more persistent, echoing through her mind even when she covered her ears. One morning, she found a strange symbol carved into the wall beside her bed. It was a circle with jagged lines radiating outward, like a twisted sun. She ran her fingers over the grooves, wondering how it had appeared, and then realized with a sickening dread that she recognized it. It was the same symbol from the book in the library, the one with the word maledictus beneath it. Desperate, she returned to the library and pulled out the book once more, flipping through the pages, searching for any clue that might explain the curse, or perhaps even break it. But the pages were blank. Every illustration, every word, had vanished. The book was an empty shell, as if mocking her attempt to understand. Sleep became elusive. Each night, the voices grew more insistent, and the footsteps outside her door became louder, more aggressive. She began to see figures in the darkness, shadows with hollow eyes and twisted grins, watching her from the corners of the room. Once, she awoke to find one standing by her bed, its face inches from hers. She screamed, but it disappeared the moment she blinked, leaving only the lingering stench of decay. Her mind began to unravel. She lost track of time, of days and nights blending together in a blur of terror and exhaustion. She felt trapped, as if the house itself were alive, feeding off her fear, drawing her deeper into its dark embrace. The walls seemed to pulse, to breathe, and the whispers became a chorus, filling every corner of her mind. The final straw came when she discovered a journal hidden in a compartment behind one of the bookshelves. It was written by her great-grandmother, detailing her own descent into madness within these walls. The entries spoke of voices, of shadows, of a presence that grew stronger with each passing day. Her great-grandmother had written about a ritual, one that could supposedly cleanse the house of its curse, but the instructions were incomplete, the last page torn out. In her final entry, her great-grandmother had written, "The house will consume you, body and soul. You cannot leave. It will follow you, it will haunt you, it will claim you. Once you've heard the whispers, they never stop." Eliza felt a chill settle in her bones, a coldness that reached into the depths of her soul. She realized that the whispers were not just voices, they were the souls of those who had come before her, trapped within the house, bound by its dark power. And soon, she would join them. Desperate, she tried to leave, but the doors were locked, the windows sealed, as if the house itself were holding her prisoner. She screamed, pounded on the walls, but no one came. She was alone, trapped, with only the voices for company. In her final moments of clarity, Eliza understood what the house wanted. It wanted her essence, her spirit, to feed its insatiable hunger. She fought against it, but it was too strong. The last thing she heard before the darkness claimed her was her own voice, joining the chorus of whispers, calling out to the next soul who would enter the house, doomed to repeat the cycle of fear and despair. Years later, another distant relative would inherit the house, drawn by its mysterious allure. And somewhere within the walls, Eliza's voice would be waiting, calling, whispering, drawing them in, as the curse continued, unbroken, eternal.